She had barely stepped off the gravel when the man barked, "You're not the shooter." His voice sliced through the sunlit silence of the range. She wore no sponsor patches, no high-tech headset, just a loose denim jacket, sun-faded jeans, and boots with dust caked at the seams. A younger woman near the scoreboard smirked and whispered, probably just a placeholder for her husband. Laughter rippled through the line behind her. Valerie said nothing. She adjusted the strap of her old canvas bag and looked straight ahead. To them, she was a fluke, a glitch in their perfect circuit of medals and men. But what they didn't know what they were about to learn was that the range they stood on would remember her name long after theirs faded, and this time she didn't flinch. If you've ever been told you don't belong just because of how you look or who you are, this story is for you. Tap, like share it with someone who needs to hear it, and stay with us. The silence is about to get loud. They didn't expect her to show up, especially not here. The Oak Ridge Precision Club wasn't just a shooting range, it was a cathedral for legacy, an unspoken temple, where the scent of oil and cordite mixed with cologne and entitlement. Walnut gun racks lined the paneled walls. Polished boots echoed across the marble floors. Every name on the brass leaderboard was a junior, or third, a child of someone who mattered. Here skill mattered, yes, but only when it came from the right last name. The invitational that morning was already abuzz. Former Marines, retired state troopers, politicians with perfect postures and matching cufflinks gathered around the main lanes. The staff wore matching Navy vests. The coffee was imported. Even the spent shells were collected in velvet-lined trays. This wasn't just sport. It was ceremony. And then she walked in. Valerie's entrance didn't cause a scene, but it should have. Her jacket was too light for the season. Her boots carried dust, not polish. A simple canvas bag hung from her shoulder, worn at the edges like it had seen too many sunrises. No one greeted her. No one offered a clipboard. A man near the check-in desk glanced up and then right past her, like she was a shadow, moving against the sun. A woman in red lipstick leaned toward her friend and muttered, "Did someone bring their housekeeper?" They laughed softly. Two perfect teeth. Sets behind too much gloss. Valerie's eyes didn't flinch. She simply stepped forward, signed her name, and waited. There were no cameras on her. No cheers. Just the soft, mechanical shuffle of the room, adjusting to a presence it didn't understand. It wasn't hatred, it was worse, it was assumption. Assumption that she was lost. Assumption that she didn't know what the safety catch did. Assumption that if she made it to the final round yesterday, it was because someone else let her. Behind her, a group of men leaned close to a leaderboard, whispering, "Could have been a scoring error," one said. Or she had help. These things happen. She's not, not one of us. Valerie didn't need to turn around to know. She had felt that air before, the thin, oxygenless space between a room full of power and the one person who didn't get the memo. She had learned long ago that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't cruelty, but polite silence. Someone handed her a number tag. She nodded in thanks, though the woman barely made eye contact. Valerie found her lane, lane 5, and stood still. Across from her, a man adjusted his high-caliber rifle and scoffed. "Hope she brought luck. She's gonna need it." She didn't reply. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a pair of gloves, worn leather faded along the fingers. She ran her thumb along the seam like she always did before loading a round. The gesture was small, but in that room full of posture and pride, it cracked something invisible. From the corner, an older man, a veteran perhaps, judging by the pins on his coat, nodded to her briefly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hint that someone somewhere had seen her before. Not as a mistake, not as a woman out of place, but as someone who had done something unforgettable. She didn't smile, she didn't need to, because when her fingers closed around the grip of her rifle, the room might still have doubted her, but her hands didn't. And that's what they never understood. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there because she already had. Now, as the murmurs settled and the first shot of the day cracked through the spring air, Valerie breathed in, slow, steady. And in that single inhale, the weight of every whisper behind her evaporated. What came next wasn't defiance. It was memory, and memory doesn't miss. "Sorry, ma'am, but we're going to need to see that again. Right here, right now." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They floated through the cool morning air like smoke, calculated, polite, and laced with doubt. Valerie had just stepped back from her lane, her final shot still echoing faintly across the canyon-backed range. A perfect group. tight, unshakable. The kind of pattern that should have been met with a nod, or at the very least a respectful glance. Instead, the range manager stepped forward, clipboard in hand, and adjusted his cap like he was about to deliver a parking fine. His voice was coated in concern, but his eyes told the truth. He didn't believe her. Not fully. Behind him, one of the local competitors, Chase Langley, third-generation lawman, all jaw and opinion, leaned against the bench and called out, "I mean, no offense, but nobody gets that grouping. First, try." "Nobody?" There was a pause, and then, as if on cue, someone else chimed in. Unless maybe she had help dialing in the scope earlier. A woman in a tailored range jacket crossed her arms and gave a smile so wide it didn't reach her eyes. You know, maybe someone from the staff. The staff, the implication. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Valerie didn't flinch. She stood still, hands relaxed, eyes forward. But something in the crowd shifted. You could feel it like a pack turning its head. The skepticism now had permission to become scrutiny. Accusation. A third voice, young, clipped, asked, did she even calibrate her own weapon? A few heads turned toward the scorekeeper. "We gonna let that round stand." The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, would you mind repeating the round? For transparency's sake." Someone near the back muttered, "If she's legit, what's the problem?" And just like that, she was on trial. Not for cheating, but for being too good, too calm, too precise, while being the wrong kind of shooter. No one asked the men to repeat their runs. No one suggested a redo when the man in lane 4 missed 1 shot out of 5. But Valerie had been too accurate, too clean. So, of course, that meant something must be wrong. One of the assistants, a boy young enough to still fidget with his gloves, walked over and handed her a new set of bullets. "Here you go, ma'am, fresh rounds, unmarked. You can use lane 5 again." There was no room to say no. The challenge was wrapped in civility. And wrapped inside, that civility was something crueler. Prove it again, prove it until we're satisfied. Valerie looked at the bullets, then up. The crowd had formed a quiet half-circle, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough to watch. She reached for her rifle without a word. The strap of her canvas bag slipped from her shoulder and landed with a soft thud against the gravel. No one moved. And then, as she turned back toward lane 5, someone from the sidelines. Chase again called out with a smirk, "Unless you need your husband to shoot this time." That one landed. A few quiet chuckles. One cough disguised as a laugh. A raised eyebrow from the woman in the red lipstick. The kind of mockery that doesn't screen. It slices, but Valerie didn't look back. She stepped into the lane, adjusted her stance, and set the rifle on the stand. Her fingers moved without hesitation, muscle memory, and grit. But even so, there was a stillness in the air now. That wasn't there before. A tension that crackled just beneath the polite surface of this elite playground. Because this wasn't about bullets anymore. It was about being seen, or rather being seen then doubted. She steadied her breathing. The range manager stood to her left, clipboard in hand, watching closely. Chase leaned forward, arms crossed, waiting for her to falter. The others whispered behind sunglasses and lanyards, and in the eye of that storm, Valerie stood alone. Not as a competitor, not even as a threat, but as an anomaly. A woman who wasn't supposed to get this far. Not dressed like that. Not holding her own weapon. Not being better than the sons of generals and judges. She looked down at the fresh rounds. She didn't blink. She didn't curse. She didn't ask for fairness. She just slid one bullet into the chamber and lifted her gaze toward the sunlit horizon. Her body still. Her hands steady. Her voice absent. But if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear something shift in the soil beneath her boots. A quiet resistance, a loaded silence, and all that remained was the trigger. No one told her to blindfold herself. That was her choice. The moment came between breaths, between the low hum of suspicion and the sharp edge of silence. Valerie reached into the pocket of her faded jacket and pulled out what looked like an ordinary black hair tie. She stepped back from the stand, turned her back to the crowd, and without a word, tied it around her eyes. There was no announcement, no explanation. Just that simple act. The band slipped into place across her brow, darkening her sight, quieting the noise, and with it, the murmurs around her began to crack like thin ice. What is she doing? She's bluffing. Is this a joke? But she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Valerie wasn't performing. She was deciding to let the world disappear. So only the truth remained. Not their truth, hers. The manager stammered something, but no one heard it, because the crowd had stopped breathing. The woman they mocked had just taken away her own sight. Now it wasn't just doubt hanging in the air. It was fear. Because if she failed now, they would win twice, once in humiliation and once in confirmation. But if she didn't, Valerie ran her hands along the barrel, finding its center, tracing the weight like a trusted friend. The weapon was an extension of her. Not just a tool, but a rhythm. Her fingers moved without need for vision, setting each round with care and quiet resolve. Behind her, someone coughed. Another shifted their stance. Somewhere to the left, the cameras began recording again. And still, she said nothing. Her body straightened, her shoulders rolled back. She raised the rifle, not with flourish, not for effect, but with precision, so practiced it was nearly sacred. The range moments ago, filled with whispers and scrutiny, had gone still. The only sounds left were the soft clinks of metal and the distant call of wind through mesquite trees. Even the birds seemed to hold back. The men who had joked about her now stood without speaking. The women who had smirked began to question whether they had misunderstood something far larger than a scorecard. Valerie's breath slowed. Inhale, hold, exhale. The kind of stillness that only comes from repetition, born in isolation. She wasn't shooting for them. She wasn't even shooting at them. She was shooting through them, through every voice that ever said, "You're not enough," through every gaze that waited for her to falter. And with the blindfold over her eyes, they finally saw her. Not as a novel, not as a woman in the wrong place, but as something they didn't have a word for. Truth maybe, or focus or grace, sharpened into form. She tightened her grip. The first shot hadn't even been fired, but the air had already cracked. The first shot didn't just echo, it rewrote the room. A sharp crack tore through the still air, and for a moment, no one moved. Then came the sound. Small, definite, undeniable, of a perfect impact against the center of the target. The kind of sound only a direct hit could make. Clean final, someone whispered "Bullseye." She didn't react. Her arms remained steady, eyes still covered by that plain black band. No shift in her feet, no celebration, just the faint rhythm of breath behind the rifle. Then came the second shot. Another strike, same sound, same stillness. No one laughed now, no one dared, from the sidelines. Chase Langley lowered his coffee cup. The woman in the red jacket crossed her arms a little tighter. The range manager swallowed hard and glanced toward the scoreboard, like it might tell him what to feel. Shot 3 dead center, shot 4. Again. By the 5th, the only sound in the crowd was disbelief folding into awe. People began stepping forward, not too close, but closer. Phones rose into the air, capturing what their eyes almost couldn't believe. Even the assistant who had handed her the rounds stood slack-jawed, his clipboard now hanging useless at his side. Valerie's posture never changed. Each pull of the trigger was the same, smooth, deliberate, without drama. Like she wasn't proving anything, like she had already made peace with the truth and was simply reminding the world of it. Shot 6, shot 7. Each time the bullet punched through the exact same center. The paper at the target stand barely fluttered because there was nothing new to pierce. She was threading her bullets through the same wound. Someone let out a quiet gasp. Another man muttered, "That's not just skill, that's something else." Shot 8, shot 9. The room, the sacred range that once thrived on hierarchy and bloodlines, was now a church of silence. The kind of silence you don't break unless you want to miss something holy. Then without pause, she chambered the final round. Shot 10. The moment it struck, the paper finally gave out. A soft tear like fabric pulled too thin. The center collapsed inward, edges peeled back as if bowing in surrender. It was no longer a target, it was a signature, and then she lowered the rifle. No. Cheers erupted, not yet. Because there was a collective breath being held. A waiting. A hope that maybe what they had seen was real. Then someone near the front began to clap. Slow at first. Unsure, like they were waiting for permission. Then another joined and another, until the air was filled with the sound of hands breaking the stillness they had clung to moments earlier. No one asked for a redo. Now no one questioned calibration. Valerie reached up and untied the blindfold. Her eyes blinked once in the sunlight. calm, dry, sharp. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. The applause grew, not wild, not frenzied, but reverent, controlled, the kind of clapping you give to something that makes you rethink the rules. And somewhere in the back, a little girl clutched her mother's sleeve and whispered, "She didn't miss." The mother nodded. "No, sweetheart, she didn't." Valerie turned and stepped away from the lane, the strap of her canvas bag finding her shoulder again, like it had never left. As she passed the row of competitors, no one dared meet her gaze, not out of shame, but out of something deeper, recognition. And in that moment, she wasn't just a woman with a rifle. She was a question they had failed to ask. She was every person they had ever overlooked. She was the truth unfolding one shot at a time, and though she said nothing, her silence spoke clearly. Not all power needs volume. Some power just never misses. And the room once so loud with doubt now echoed with only one thing: respect. At first, no one noticed the woman in the navy blazer. She had been standing near the far edge of the field, just beyond the last row of spectators. No sunglasses, no clipboard, no exaggerated gestures. Just quiet observation and a leather-bound folder clutched in both hands. But as the last round tore through the heart of the target and the applause swelled like a rising tide, she stepped forward, calm, precise, and with the kind of walk that parts a room without needing to raise a voice. Valerie hadn't moved far from lane 5. She was still collecting her gloves when the woman approached her, tone composed yet unmistakable Valerie Clark. The noise faded, not immediately but noticeably. One by one, people began turning toward the voice that didn't sound like it belonged to the Oak Ridge crowd. Valerie looked up, eyes still adjusting to the shift from focus to recognition. She nodded barely. The woman extended a hand. Special Agent Brooke Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation. No one spoke. Agent Miller continued, her voice steady. Eyes warm but focused. "We've been tracking high-level precision shooters across the country. We weren't just here for the competition. We were looking for someone who doesn't just aim well, but who can operate under pressure most people would break under." She opened the folder. 10 rounds, blindfolded. All confirmed bullseyes, no drift, no variation. She turned the folder so Valerie and the crowd behind her could see. Inside were test results dossiers and a pre-filled training contract bearing the seal of the Bureau. "We'd like to invite you to Washington Advanced Training Specialized Division. You'll have your pick of postings when you're through." Valerie didn't blink. She didn't reach for the folder. She simply asked why now. Agent Miller smiled, not smug, not indulgent, almost relieved. "Because everyone else out here came to be seen. You came to be understood." Behind them, the silence swelled again. But this time, it was different. It was no longer stiff with judgment. It was hollowed out by realization. Chase Langley, once so loud in his doubt, now stood motionless beside the bench. His mouth twitched once like he might speak, but he didn't. The clipboard that had once felt like a badge of authority now hung limp in his hand. Someone behind him whispered, "That's her, the one they were scouting." Another voice. "I thought she was just local." And just like that, the narrative shifted. Valerie wasn't a curiosity. She wasn't a fluke. She wasn't someone who had to keep proving herself to earn a seat in their world. She had never needed their permission. She had just needed this moment to remind them that skill doesn't ask for approval. It announces itself. As Valerie reached out and took the folder, the crowd began to move, but not with noise. With respect, heads dipped, shoulders straightened. Conversations halted mid-sentence as eyes followed her path. Even the range manager who, hours earlier, had questioned her very presence took a slow step back as she passed. There were no handshakes, no apologies, just one long, quiet line of sight. Each pair of eyes trying to undo every judgment they had made that morning, but it was too late. The story had already changed. And at the center of it stood a woman in worn boots and a dusted jacket holding nothing more than a folder. And the truth. As she turned toward the exit, Agent Miller walking beside her, a girl in the crowd reached out and touched her mother's hand. "Will she work for the FBI now?" The mother nodded. "Yes, honey, she already does. For a long time." Valerie didn't say much about that day. Not to the neighbors who suddenly looked her in the eye at the grocery store. Not to the strangers who sent letters with nothing more than, "Thank you for reminding me it's okay to be quiet and right." And not to the local news anchors who begged for an interview, hoping to catch a soundbite that might explain what 10 shots had already said. But something had changed not in how she carried herself, but in how the world heard her. The silence that used to make people dismiss her now made them listen. She went back to her routines, her late afternoon walks, her coffee at the old diner, where the waitstaff started pouring her cup without asking. But there was always someone new sitting nearby. A teenage girl wearing a ROTC sweatshirt, a mother with a daughter who gripped a toy rifle just a little tighter, a quiet man in his 60s who nodded to her as if to say, "I know what it's like to be called a fake when you've spent your life being exact." She never corrected their assumptions. She didn't need to, because now, when her name was mentioned, it didn't come with a question mark. It came with a pause, a silence full of weight, full of memory, and the truth. The truth no longer had to shout. It just stood exactly where it always had, right in the center, and that was enough. If you've ever felt the sting of being overlooked, if you've ever stood quietly in a room waiting for your work to speak before you did, let this story remind you don't need to be loud to leave a mark. You just need to be unshakably true. If this story moved you even a little, let someone else hear it too. Like, share or subscribe and help keep these moments from fading. Because sometimes the world needs silence to remember what justice really sounds like.